Hi, this is Vicente. On behalf of my co-presenters, Luis, Obaid, and Ian, I'd like to send you greetings from Bristol, England. I would also like to thank the conference organizers, the discussants, and the co-presenters for this particular symposium. I apologize for not being with you synchronously for this meeting. I've tried to join different meetings at about 1 or 2 a.m. and it never turned out well. So I'll be preparing this short presentation and I hope that you were able to learn from our presentation. Thank you. Our presentation is entitled Navigating Datascapes, Mapping the Ethical Landscapes of Data. This is an offshoot of an existing Australian Research Council Discovery Grant entitled Beyond Global Discourses of Data that our team is working on. When COVID-19 struck several months ago, the phenomenon that we were exploring, big data in education, became much more pronounced. With forced closure of schools and the reliance on technology, we realized that looking at the impact of big data to education stakeholders in different education systems became much more important and urgent. We look at 4 jurisdictions. The first one we look at is Australia. And we are aware that the National Assessment Program for Literacy and Numeracy, or NAPLAN, tests were all cancelled for 2020 due to the coronavirus. When we take a look at Bangladesh, because of the forced closure of schools, what the government implemented was the Higher Secondary Certificate AutoPass, which essentially automatically moved students to the next year level. This was their response to the forced closure of schools. Singapore's Primary School Leaving Examination, or PSLE test, the high-stakes examination for Year 6 students to move on to secondary school, had a different enactment in the Republic of Singapore. Actually, when we take a look at Singapore, if you factor in the actual isolation or forced closure of schools, you will realize that they only had about 2 weeks of closure. Everything else was undertaken face-to-face. And the same was implemented for the PSLE and for the O-level oral examinations. The English model was also quite unique. In order to address the forced closure of schools, what happened in England was that teachers were the ones who formulated teacher-predicted grades for the A-level and the GCSE qualifications. The Department for Education asked Ofqual, the regulator of qualifications, to create an algorithm to try to combat what they expected to be grade inflation on the part of teachers. When the algorithm was actually implemented across the board, the algorithm produced grades were about 30 to 40% lower than what the teacher predicted grades were. And this resulted in a furor, understandably. And what happened next was a policy U-turn. The Department for Education eventually had to undertake a reversal of their decision and accepted the teacher predicted grades. When we take a look at these 4 jurisdictions, a common denominator that is pretty clear in our analysis is the phenomenon of test results, what we refer to in our study as data or big data. We investigate how big data influences education stakeholders in these 4 jurisdictions. And in doing this, we decided to adopt 2 theoretical perspectives, and we attempted to combine them with the objective of obtaining greater insights. The first theoretical perspective that we adopt is from Bruno Latour, Michael Calon, and John Law, scholars in science and technology studies who collectively created actor network theory, or A&T. we consider several aspects of A&T as really useful for our inquiry. One particular component is the idea of actants. Anything or anyone that accomplishes an act, be it human and non-human, in the A&T perspective are referred to as actants. When we take a look at the four jurisdictions and how these were affected or impacted by the use of tests, PSLE, NAPLAN, the HSC Autopass for Bangladesh, or the algorithm for examinations in England, we see that somehow technology broadly defined. It could be algorithms, it could be pen and paper tests, it could be policies, had a reaction to each other, and we call these as actants. The other component of A&T which we really found useful is the idea of agency, a symmetrical agency that occurs among the actants. Actants in A&T make things happen. Technology, a non-human entity in this formulation, in this model, make things happen. And we find that in exploring the influence of big data, adopting this particular component of A&T is useful. Another component of A&T which also is really meaningful for us is the idea of actor networks. Actor networks are formed when actants interact continuously. It's the relationships within different actants. These relationships in A&T, these are described as the actor networks. Actor networks themselves become actants. It's this process of linkages and relationships which we really find useful as we explore the phenomenon of big data in education systems. We combine this with Arjun Appadurai's scapes, in which he talked about how global cultural flows manifested in his five scapes: mediascapes, technoscapes, idioscape, ethnoscape, and finanscape. We thought that these scapes were also useful as we explore the big data's impact in education systems. And what we have created or formulated, or the claim that we make in our study, is that there is a datascape. A datascape that needs to be navigated by education stakeholders in different education systems. We formally define datascapes as global, historical, and cultural flows of actor networks, their different modes of translations, and the myriad traces that emerge in education. This is how we define it. Translations are the processes of actants, either performing the role of a mediator in which they actually transform policies, guidelines, or actants becoming intermediaries in which they don't actually do any form of transformation. So these are all part of A&T's interpretation of translations. And then we also take a look at unintended consequences that emerge from these actor networks, which are referred to as traces. A fundamental question that we ask is, when education stakeholders find themselves in this datascape, what kinds of ethical decision making do they undertake? Do they take a look at deontological reasons for evidence-informed decisions? Or do they take a look at teleological reasons for decisions that they undertake? These are just some of the questions that we explore. And in our presentation today, my colleagues Luis, Obaid, and Ian will elaborate further as we explore the different jurisdictions that we have chosen to study for our inquiry. Thank you very much.